I congratulate SWESCO and PACAs for initiating these thought leadership sessions. In a society where there are many problems like the ones we have, it is easy to get so overwhelmed with the problems that we may stop thinking. So events like this bring us back to the need to check what we are missing and the fact that we must continue reflecting on the challenges we face as a people and how to solve them without creating more problems than we sought to solve. Recently, I don't know how many of you saw the op-ed I wrote about the intention to privatize the ECG or to have private sector participation. I tend to speak openly. I like to call myself a free thinker, and I share my views without restrictions. And in that, I said I chose to put out the op-ed because very often when we seek to solve problems in this country, we often end up creating more problems than we initially sought to solve. And we forget that much as every problem has a solution, every solution creates a problem. And it is important that in solving things, we take a look at what it may create and prevent them. And it is in that essence that I put that out. So having said that, I welcome such thought leadership sessions by an old students' union, a body, because without such thought leadership sessions, our ideas will not be factored into the discussions, and it will fall between the NDC and MPP divide, which we always fall into. Now, I also like the fact that it is a conversation approach. And I was asked before I came out that I was going to do a PowerPoint presentation, and I said, I was told by the PACAs that it's a conversation. In a conversation, you just keep chatting. So I like the conversation approach because it takes us beyond just what we present here to what will go into our homes, our cars, our offices, etc. Now the topic. I like to see things as straightforward as possible. So when I saw the topic, I was a bit frightened. The political leadership conundrum, the balanced leadership and change. The first thing I did was to look for the meaning of conundrum. What exactly is conundrum? Is it some SWESCO term or something? But I found out the meaning. And I like the topic. Now, why is the topic on political leadership? It tends to coincide with my own beliefs that not all of us can go into politics, and I have been asked several times and invited into politics by all sides of political device, and I've always said I won't go into politics. However, I hold a very strong belief that politics is just too important to leave it to the politicians alone. So much as we all cannot go in, it is very important because whatever they do affects us all. And that is the reason why we must continue making our comments known at each point in time that we can afford to. So like I said, I checked a few words. One of them is leadership. And I like to keep things simple. Leadership simply means to me somebody who makes things better than they met it. That's my simple definition of leadership. If you don't believe that, then essentially you are just a position occupant. The second thing is a conundrum. And I understood it to mean a confusing problem, something that is difficult to solve. Then I looked at change, and it says making things different. In other words, can political leaders overcome the chaos to have an effective positive change? That's actually how I see the topic. So if you strip it off the conundrum, it is simply how our political leaders can make positive change. That's how I see it. Now, leaders in Africa tend to get blamed a lot for the things they do and the things they don't do. But why not? Who else are we supposed to blame? Because if they come saying that they can solve our problems and they don't solve it, then we must blame them. I lead an organization, and I'm a leader in my own right. I lead a group of about 140 people across many countries, and I take the blame when I make mistakes. So I believe that leaders should take the blame when they do make mistakes, and they should take the success when they actually succeed. But we cannot talk about political leadership in Africa or in Ghana in particular looking at only the current political leaders, because what we call today is what used to be tomorrow yesterday. So whatever problems we are having now comes from a series of things that probably must have happened in the past that we need to confront. And it is in that regard that I chose to go back to our type of leadership we have had over the years. And the first I want to address is the leadership from chieftaincy. Because we have always had leaders in one form or the other. Now, I'm fond of making tweets. And one of the things I often talk about is how our chiefs behave. And I'll be touching on chiefs a couple of times. The other kind of leaders I saw is fetish priests. Because not all tribes in Ghana are necessarily led by chiefs. There are some tribes where the fetish priest was also the chief. So he spoke to God, or the gods, gave the law, and was also the executor or the executioner of the law. Then we have those who became leaders by conquest. They conquered another and they occupied lands, and over the period they leave their lineage, who then became the chief subsequently. So they may not have gone to war, but by the conquest of their forefathers, they became leaders by inheritance. Then we've had the modern leaders, and they come in all forms. And all these are political leaders. Until we had the modern form of society, all these were political leaders, properly so called. The modern leaders have come in the form of freedom fighters, including those who fought for independence. Then we've had the post-colonial leaders, where after having attained what we sought to attain, we now have to do something with it. One of the lessons that we forget in leadership is that what brings us here often does not keep us here or take us to where we want to go. There's a difference between the journey to lead and what we do to make the people that we lead better after having attained it. So there are a lot of post-colonial failures and successes as well. Then we have the soldiers, some of whom were adventurous and overthrew the post-colonial leaders. So these are other types of political leaders we have had. Then we've had leaders from our ancient times who were not necessarily chiefs, because Africa has had its own fair share of empires and kingdoms. Songhai, Mali, ancient Ghana, the Zulus, the Kushites are all examples of things that have happened in the past with our political leaders. Mansa Musa, his wealth is talked about, Sundiata. Many find it surprising whenever their attention have been drawn to the fact that as early as 1235, Mansa Musa's kingdom, or Sundiata's kingdom, had a written constitution called the Kura Futa. Now, the date 1235 is actually given by the British. Some of us who are cynical have reason to suspect that the date was manipulated by the colonialists in order for it to be seen that the written constitution happened after 1215 Magna Carta. Because there are those who believe that the Kura Futa existed far ahead of Magna Carta. But that's neither here nor there. It remains the fact that Africa had earlier invented its own form of writing and had universities. After all, the Timbuktu University is the oldest university in the world by records. Smelting of iron, mathematics, etc. In some of the Greek writings, they talk about having learned from Africa. Now we tend to conceive writing in terms of the letters that we know in English and French. But we forget that in many languages, writing is symbols too. The Chinese and most Eastern languages to this day, the writing is nothing but symbols. And in the Egyptian language, hieroglyphics, which are symbols, were writing too. So the Dinkra symbols and the rest we have around us are actually evidence that we invented our own form of writing. The difference, though, is that our leaders seem to suffer a very big fault. The fault of sticking to the things which are so old that it prevents them from moving forward. I have postulated, and I tweeted about this, I think yesterday or a couple of days ago, that there are three enemies to the future. The first enemy are those who benefit from old systems, and because they benefit from it, they don't want new systems and new innovation to come. The second enemy are those who, even though they have new ideas about new systems, neither put them out nor implement it, and feel lazy to implement it. They are the most dangerous of the three enemies. The third enemy are the masses who rise to the defense of those who keep the old system and who are the very people who made them powerless. These are the three enemies, and these three enemies have affected Africa in many, many ways. So whereas we may be reading about the Ottoman Empire, the Roman Empire, Julius Caesar, and all the rest, we read very little about our own empress. But why is this important to me? Because I trace the things that they did to this very day. And it appears that the very idea of being a leader is constituted in our minds as something which exists by itself, exists in itself. It's intrinsic. So for many Africans, including Ghanaians, leadership is intrinsic. It is not meant to achieve a goal or to become better or make the people's life better than we met it. So we occupy it and we enjoy it. I reflected this in a tweet in September 2022, where I said, and some people may feel uncomfortable about it, especially if you are a chief. My apologies in advance. I say it as it is. The tweet said, we may feel good, and we may feel good with abundance, wealth, and proud to have our arms adorned with gold, whilst being carried shoulder high in a village with no water, power, or hospital, and whose gold is owned by foreigners. So far as we cherish greed and pomposity, we would overlook our insignificance. When we attain leadership, it appears that the leadership goes into our heads and we forget that we are supposed to make things better. So gradually over the period, we have become more and more insignificant. So when we look around and we talk about great leaders, we will talk about Deng Xiaoping, Lee Kuan Yew, George Washington, etc. And at times people even talk about those who partitioned Africa. And we adore them. At times make controversial tweets. Again, apologies for that. Today, for example, I was surprised to listen to CNN and other Western media, where a lot of Europeans are complaining about being left out of the attempt by Donald Trump to negotiate a conclusion to the Ukraine war. And it reminded me about something I said on 23rd January. So I chose to tweet it, a picture. And in that picture, I showed in the predictions I make annually, a picture of Trump and Putin in one, and Zelensky in a small corner, and two elephants fighting. And I said that the Europeans forget when they want to be at that. I mean, I'm not a supporter of Trump as such. It's just a reflection of what I saw. They forget in making that complaint that when they met in 1835, November to February 1884, November to February 1835 to partition Africa. And the partition was as a result of their decision to end the wars they were fighting in Africa. They were worrying about our resources. And they said, let us come and have peace so that we will stop the war and we will share Africa into pieces and get the resources. When they met, Africa wasn't there. So this is not the first time somebody is having a meeting in settling a problem that others are not there. But I added to that tweet that we should not forget that when two elephants fight, they do not consider the grass nor the neighboring gardens. That's exactly what is happening now. But this is an important lesson not for Europe. I make this lesson for Africa. Because when the time comes for USAID to be cancelled, we forget how much they support our health system. It means that if you allow your health system to be supported wholly by foreigners, the day a leader changes and decides not to support or not to do USAID, they will not consider the grass nor the garden. That is the lesson we need to learn. Now, interestingly, because of our attitude after the 14th century, Africa seemed to have suffered a lot of foreign dominance. 200 years we became slaves and we learned no lessons about it. For another 150 years, we became colonies. And we forget that even some of the colonization was voluntary initially. So was slavery, a first sale of our very strong by our chiefs, who didn't realize that they were supposed to make things better. So in so doing, we sold our strongest, then welcomed Mongo Park and Don Diego de Azambuja. In 1844, the bond, it was a few fancy chiefs who actually invited the colonialists. I have heard the story told by Tony about how we sold our gold also by even carrying the people who were going to sell it to. I don't want to go into the details of that. He told that story in a very beautiful way. I was so surprised. So from 1619 all the way for 200 years, we were sold, and then we were then partitioned and divided. Now, what is strange about this is that to this day, our leaders have not realized that unity is more important than gold. I hear so many leaders talk about our natural resources, and it really gets my nerves when I hear people talk about it. That we have the natural resources. Africa has always had the most critical minerals, in quotes, always. When the world needed strong men to build the world, we supplied it. When they needed minerals, we supplied it. When they needed doctors, we supplied it. And we are supplying the critical minerals also. When the people don't recognize and utilize what God has given them, somebody takes it away. But you can never utilize it if you are disunited. So unity, and unity not necessarily within the continent, but even within the countries, is very important, and I'll touch on this a few times. We tend to misunderstand unity. There are many who think unity means being one. No. That which is one need not be united, because it's already one. It is those who are diverse who need to act as one. Unity means acting together. It doesn't necessarily mean becoming one. Because if you're already one, you need not be united. God created a society of so diverse tribes and people that our strength lies only in acting together. And so far as we remain divided, one chief may invite somebody to colonize them, and it takes just another person to decide what else should be done to us. This then brings me to the so-called Ghana enterprise. And whenever I hear people talk about Ghana Incorporated, I don't understand why we keep referring to that. So far as I'm concerned, when we seek to appoint chief executives, or we appoint even a messenger, we do an advert. And the advert will say, we want some qualities. Do you have this qualification? Are you honest? Do you have integrity, etc.? Our political leaders are elected by being popular. It's as simple as that. How are we an enterprise when we select based on popularity? I don't see us as an enterprise in that sense. More importantly, if you were to equate it to an enterprise, do you know of any organization that progresses where every single thing the leader does is opposed by another person, and every single thing the opponent does is to undermine what the person is being done? It's like having two chief executives in one organization. So we don't really have the enterprise spirit, so we would like to deceive ourselves as that. We suffer from endemic disunity, and I think that it is important that we make a conscious effort to actually deal with that. This is so important that if I were to pick the Constitution, I can point out all the clauses in the Constitution which were written for one human being. Now, I had occasion to talk about that when I had the privilege to deliver the Constitutional Day lecture on January 7th, 2023, so I will not go over that. But I mentioned that because of the very reason that enters is in our psyche about what leadership is about, and I will touch on that very shortly. I have still not come to that point. Now, because you see many Ghanaian leaders who like to write themselves into the law, I've had the privilege of leading the drafting of several laws in Ghana, several, I can't mention them. And on many occasions, you have to be having stakeholder consultations, and you have politicians who make recommendations not because they want it, but because they think they will be implementing it. And they forget that they have an 8-year lifespan at most. At most. I was once approached by somebody as to why I would not contest an election. And I said, so far as I'm concerned, I've had a lifetime of influence from my infancy. Why would I sacrifice that for 8 years? Some of us must stay out of politics. It doesn't mean we can't do public service. It doesn't mean we won't help. I have served on boards before. It means that there are some people who must maintain their independence, because it is only with independent thinking that we can direct and make suggestions that people can take that into account. So as I said, unity is quite an important thing. And I want to emphasize again that the main duty of a leader or leaders is to make things better than they met it. Now, making things better means many things to different people. How is it that we always get it wrong? And how do we see making things better? For some, it simply means occupying a position and making things better for himself or herself. For others, it means creating wealth and improving lives. Yet, there are times that we confuse creating wealth with reducing poverty. The two are not the same. So some, it means creating jobs. For others, it means appointing people into public positions. For some, it means reducing cost of living. For others, it means making things affordable for them now by taking money from the public purse. For some, it means access to amenities. For others, it means unleashing the entrepreneurship spirit of everybody, so that instead of creating organizations like Youth Enterprise Authority, or the Youth YEA, NACOP, getting people to queue at LWAC, national service, where after every cycle we have a number of ghost names. We collect the ghost names and put them more ghost names in, youth corps, etc. Instead of that, the entrepreneurship spirit of the nation will be unleashed, so much so that people will create jobs, and then many people will get jobs, because governments don't create jobs. They cannot create jobs. They create the enabling environment, which includes SOEs creating jobs. Now, I've said this over and over again, that I am not a believer in quote and unquote private sector led growth. No, I am not. And many people find it surprising. I am a believer in growth. Growth can be led by anybody. Strategy depends on the rank of the ladder we occupy. And one of the suggestions I have is that at the stage that we are, it is possible for state-owned enterprises to stimulate growth. The problem I have is that government has business doing business, but it must do business as business. It cannot do business as private sector. As public sector. So if you appoint the right people and give them the freedom to manage enterprises, SOEs will have profit. But if you appoint political activists to those positions, then SOEs will go bad. It's as simple as that. After all, we don't need to go far. I always cite the example of Ethiopian Airlines. It's owned by the government of Ethiopia. It's a very profitable airline. And the airline industry is where you have some of the smallest margins. If Ethiopian Airlines can be profitable, anything else can be profitable. It's how we do it. But we cannot keep criticizing politicians without criticizing ourselves as business leaders, and I'm a business leader. And there is one major fault that Ghanaian business leaders have. Incidentally, many business leaders have ended up in politics. We suffer from what I call collective individualism. Collective individualism is a syndrome where the people come together when there is a funeral and there is outdooring and there is anything social, we do it together. We will all contribute. The fancies will say, and each of us will contribute. But give one business leader the chance to become president of an association, then he goes to the president, gets a favor for himself, and abandons the rest of the people. So you see that much as we are collective, we are very individualistic when it comes to success. It will go down to this one big problem that I want us to talk about. Then there is a much talk about vision. And there are those who believe that Ghanaian leaders don't have vision. I disagree. I do not know any Ghanaian political leader who does not have vision or who have not had vision. Our political leaders have always had vision, in my view, but there are other things that make them fail, and I will enumerate them, and I will touch on the vision again. Before rising to power and when they come into power, they are two separate things. And there are those who say they change when they get into power. That's true. But they can only change when there is absence of deep-seated beliefs. It's not because the power simply just make them change. If you have you don't have deep-seated beliefs, then power will reveal what you already are. And that is my belief. So what now is a conundrum? Let me deal with the conundrum of the things that causes it. The first problem is that they underestimate the problem and overestimate themselves. Because we are divided, we blame everything on those in power or on those in opposition. Because the main goal is to overtake each other and win. We are not fighting collectively. So as a result, once we can blame everything on the other person, we have overestimated ourselves in the minds of our own and our minds of the people, and underestimated the problem. Now, what are the problems that we underestimate? One of them is external. External means it's outside the country. The other is internal. It means it's within the country. Let me illustrate with a few of internal ones. There are those who fund political parties, and they fund in expectation of profit. So when you come into power, they must make return on investments. That problem is underestimated. That when you get into power, you may promise to make a certain appointment based on integrity, but that integrity has already been sacrificed as a result of the funding structure. And my recommendation is that politicians must recognize that. And in recognizing and collecting the money, make promises within the boundaries that they can convey, they can meet ahead, so that way you are not underestimating the problem. Number two is family. We come to power thinking that we are only coming to power with those who helped us come to power. Family have got influence. Children, wives, brothers, cousins, suddenly start doing things, some on your blind side, and it becomes difficult for you to deal with them. And because this problem is overlooked on the rise to power, we tend to forget that we must tell our family people that we ought to discipline them. They ought to discipline themselves. I had a friend who was once a governor of Nigeria, one of the states in Nigeria, and he told me a story when I visited him, that he decided to be very honest when he became a governor, until one day he was summoned to his village, and his uncle, who was a chartered accountant, and he expected much better from a chartered accountant, told him that, "Governor, opportunity don't come but once. And if you don't take care of your family, this is your last opportunity." And according to him, he understood it in traditional terms. There are those who also forget that the party office will do things which are not necessarily creating or will create a good image for. Then there are traditional leaders who may call you to make appointments. You have a constitution which says that we should take regional balance into account. I've often asked the question that if we wanted to make this country spotlessly clean and we wanted to ban polythene bags the way we admire Rwanda and what do you call it, Singapore for doing that, I want one person to tell me that if one of our very big chiefs, at times I mention the name, arrive at Kotoka holding 2 polythene bags himself, which immigration officer or policeman will collect the polythene bag from him? It's important you ask that question. If you cannot do that, then don't promise to ban polythene bags. Or before you make that promise, you call the chiefs into a room and say, "You cannot carry polythene bags. No. I will buy you paper bags, or if you do, I will sanction you." That you cannot do either, because it breeds distrust. We forget that superstition, beliefs, spiritual omen are part of the things which influence us. And people will come and tell you that this juju is affecting you, this place you are going, be careful of what you sit on, etc. We forget that even abroad, put it in quotes, such things happen. There are stories about the influence of Margaret Thatcher's husband and investigations that people called for to investigate her during her reign about the extent to which that they claim he was getting contracts. So it's not peculiar to Africa. It is how we combat it which is the problem. Then we forget even cross-party influence. There are those who are able to bribe both parties, and they are influential in both parties. There are many of them like that. Then there is the base, those who are the rabble-rousers, who can put pressure regarding the things you do, and who frighten you that we will not vote for you the next time. So, in the midst of all this, we forget what appointees will do. And many presidents in particular forget that many ministers drive their own agenda and not that of the president. Then lastly, we forget that the public service itself has its own nuances, and some public servants themselves can undermine politicians. So the point is that politicians completely underestimate the conundrum of this. It is when I listed this that I understood why Suesco added conundrum to the topic. I agree with you now. It's a real conundrum. Then comes the role of the elite. In the midst of this, what can the elite do? The elite should be doing exactly what Suesco is doing. And this is not the first time I'm speaking. I keep saying that the worst the elite can do to this nation is to stop talking. It doesn't mean politicians will listen. It simply means we should keep talking. What will happen is that people will tell them, did you hear that? The last time I granted an interview on Citi FM, I cannot count on my fingertip the number of people who told me this has been forwarded to this man, this has been forwarded to this man. They listen. Whether they do listen. The op-ed I wrote on ECG, I've been approached by a lot of people, including the technical committee. I had about 1 hour Zoom call with them discussing my views. On this platform in 2015, November, I stood here and made an open recommendation for the creation of a Ministry of Business Development and insisted that it is different from Ministry of Trade. It was created, it was my idea. Of course, at the during the second term of the government, they didn't continue with it. But at least it showed me that somebody listens. So it is important for us to continue having these conversations. And when we meet them in person, let us tell them how we feel openly, without being partisan. It's because without that, we cannot help them in any way. Okay. The other problem that we must talk about is lack of strategy and our failure to distinguish strategy from tactics. Clearly, many African countries, including Ghana, suffer from lack of strategy. So as a result, they are unable to combat all these pressures. And you find that also as a result, they are professional opportunity takers who find the least opportunity to be able to infiltrate and take advantage of the aggravated disunity that we have. How is it that we have turned our society into a situation where instead of looking for long-term goals, everything is transactional, and everything we do is just for that transaction? I was shocked when on one occasion I led an attempt to offload state-owned enterprises to a private sector party, high net worth individual. And when I was talking to him about how he can leverage it and become an African champion, his response was that he was waiting to sell it to some guy from Europe. I felt and I thank God that he never got it anyway. If all that we think about is how to do a transaction and make money now, then it is not the kind of thing that, we hope to make that change that we look for. But why does that happen? It happens because as a people, everything that we do is just for our own pomposity. So we are not united around any central vision that we want to attain. So we are caught between whether we are retrogressing, stagnating, or making progress. It's one of the conundrums that we need to deal with. And we have long been victims. As I said earlier, we have always supplied the critical minerals whether it's slavery or the natural minerals or brain drain, etc. And it's important that we find ways to stop that. The way to stop that is to recognize these things and overcome them. Of all of them, I will just narrow down to what I call the 3 biggest challenges and temptations of every leader. And for me, it defines my life. I have had occasion to talk about this on several fora, especially when I'm called to talk about integrity. And it's very simple. I'm not known as a audacious person, etc. My closest regularity with religion, apart from praying to God every day, is listening to Reverend Otabo. And I'm serious. I'm not saying that because you are here. But among the things I live by in the Bible is the 3 temptations of Christ. And I believe that if political leaders can overcome it, and every leader can overcome it, it makes life very simple. And I will explain. What are these? The first temptation is the desire when we don't have. When we are looking for something that we lack, especially political power, it forces us to do everything to attain it. If you will attain anything at all costs, that is your God already. You have already sacrificed God. There is nothing that I want to attain at all costs. I have to do everything it takes to attain it. But if I don't get it, I tell myself, maybe God doesn't want me to have it, at least at this time. So if you have to get it at all costs, then it's your God. Many politicians attain power at all costs. And during that cost, they borrow from the wrong people. They go to the wrong juju place. They make different promises they cannot keep. They go outside and make promises and promise projects they have no idea how to execute. And that is the first problem. The second is desire when we have. I talked about desire when we lack. But the second is desire when we have. Now, if you go back to the temptation of Christ, he was told, bow before me and I'll give you a loaf of bread. You are hungry. That's desire. You should not eat by bread alone. It means that the other things are more important than just what you are desiring. And I live by this principle. Now I come to the second one. I say desire when we have. When we have, there is a tendency for us to have more. Especially if we lacked before. Somehow our comfort goes into the possessions we have. I wonder how many cars people can drive at a time, or how many houses they can live in at a time. But amassing it not to create wealth and to make other people life better, but for yourself. For this, just for yourself. A whole diplomat came to me and pointed to a politician on how much money that politician has stolen physically. And I was wondering, that is money that I think I cannot spend over 30 years, even if I was multiplying my current spend by 10 times. Why does one person want to steal that physically from the masses? It belongs to the desire when we have, the desire to acquire more. If you will worship me, I will give you the rest of the cities and the whole world. It creates greed. And I tweeted once, greed and ambition are not the same. I'm a very ambitious person. Greed, ambition, whilst ambition helps you to achieve, greed turns your mind into a grabbing machine and seeks to help you to prevent others from attaining their own goals. So you alone can be distinguished. That is exactly what we do. And we have a lot in our society. People look at the problems around them, instead of at least talking about it or helping or creating jobs, they want to be different so that they can be special and everybody else can be ordinary. I believe that if we will come together and talk to each other in conversations like this, not underestimate the problem, and admit that all these plethora of things are the things which make us feel, we will find a way of being able to overcome it, whilst at the same time retaining political power and progressing the nation.